Hello, everybody. If you made it here, you are here to learn about Community Charge, which is a new program being put out by Green Energy Consumers Alliance, Power Options, and LISC, Massachusetts, and we're really excited to tell you all about it today. With that, who are the presenters? I will call on my Power Options friends to start by introducing themselves.
Thanks so much, Anna. My name is Anna Brackenhofer. I'm the Energy Program Analyst and managing this program with the Power Options team, and very excited to be partnering with LISC, Massachusetts, and Green Energy Consumers. And I'll hand it over to Fair.
Thanks, Anna. My name is Fair Gillette. I'm a junior alternative fuels analyst at Power Options, and I support our solar and EV charging program at Power Options, and as well as this community charge program. And with that, I'll hand it to Walt.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for showing up today. My name's Walter Gray. I'm a program director at Power Options. I'm working on both our solar and EV charging programs. And Joe.
Thanks, Walt. Hello, all. I am Joe Delarose. I work at LISC, Massachusetts as the program officer for Green Homes, and I'm very excited to be partnering with Green Energy Consumers Alliance and Power Options on this exciting new program.
My name is Anna Vanderspeck. I am the Electric Vehicle Program Director at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. We're a local nonprofit as well. And you will hear from everybody who just spoke throughout the webinar and get also a more detailed introduction to each of the organizations. But this is the team that will be presenting today. Next, just a quick clarification of our organizational roles within Community Charge. So Power Options ran a competitive RFP process, a request for proposals, to select vendors and pre-negotiate pricing on your behalf for installing EV charging. They're the folks who will meet with you, discuss your specific site and your interests, and then connect you with the best suited of the approved vendors through the Community Charge program. LISC, Massachusetts is connecting the Community Charge program, or bringing the Community Charge program to the affordable housing community in Massachusetts, and brings that angle and expertise. And Green Energy Consumers Alliance is helping with the outreach to site hosts like you, but also for site hosts that actually go forward and install EV charging. We will work with you to help get the word out within your community and make sure people know the stations exist, but also know how to use them and how to get an electric car, and have a resource to answer all their questions. So again, you'll hear from all three of us throughout this presentation today, but that's just a quick who's who. So our agenda today, we will start with some level setting, just electric vehicle charging basics, to make sure we're all familiar with the various terms we're going to be throwing around today. Then the Power Options folks will introduce the Community Charge program and its offerings in more detail. Then we'll talk about how to get started, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Before we launch into those basics, though, we want to hear from you. So we are going to launch a poll. So we'd like to get a sense of who's on the call, and also whether you primarily serve low or moderate income residents. That's a priority of this program, as Anna will tell us later. And then we're curious about your experience with installing charging before. So it looks like we've got a good mix between public housing authorities, other public entities, nonprofits, both within the low income housing space and not. Definitely biggest chunk of the group here is other public entities, so non-public housing public entities. Then we've got a pretty even split between folks who do primarily serve low or moderate income residents and folks who don't. And then a big chunk of the audience has installed EV charging before. So it looks like half of you have installed EV charging before, a third have considered it, done some research, but haven't moved forward yet, and about 15% are totally new to this conversation. So welcome to you all. Thank you for giving us a little bit of a snapshot into who you are. We'll use that to just make sure we're answering all your questions and getting all the different perspectives in. So I will end that poll and say thank you, and move right along into our EV charging basics. So for those of you who've installed charging before, hang tight. We will talk about Community Charge specifically, but I want to make sure we go over these basics. So When we say electric vehicle charging station, the formal term for what we're talking about is electric vehicle supply equipment, or EVSE. You might see those terms in various documents and resources. This is basically the unit that its job is to safely and efficiently transfer power from the grid to the electric vehicle that is plugged in. This graphic on the bottom illustrates all the different pieces of infrastructure that do that work of bringing power to the vehicle. So we've got the electric grid, where that infrastructure is owned and maintained by the electric utility, which in Massachusetts may be an investor-owned utility like National Grid or Eversource or Unitil, or maybe a municipal light plant or a municipally owned utility. So we're talking about the distribution network bringing power to the transformer all the way to your meter. Then there's electrical infrastructure that is owned by the site host. There we're talking about the panel and any conduit that's running out to the actual charging pad. And then the EVSE is the actual unit that you plug into the conduit that you've brought from your panel. And then, of course, the vehicle that's being charged at the end. These different segments are important to keep in mind. We'll come back to this graphic later when we talk about incentives, because different incentive programs help cover the costs of different parts of this ecosystem, if you will. Some of you may have heard the term smart charger or networked charger. That is an EVSE or a charging station that is hooked up to Wi-Fi or cell service that allows remote access, both in terms of data, so you can see who's charging, when they're charging, for how long, but also allows you to set pricing, get revenue, and monitor the stations from afar. So we're pretty much unilaterally talking about smart chargers that are networked in that way, so you have that remote access and more flexibility in terms of payment and monitoring. Many of you have maybe seen that there's lots of talk about different charging ports and levels, so this is another level setting slide. There are 3 types of charging out there. The slowest type is level 1 charging. It's called a trickle charge. It's when you plug a vehicle into a normal 120 volt outlet. That works for many people at home, but is not supported by community charge because we're really focusing on the faster types of charging, specifically level 2 and DC fast charging. I'll draw your attention to the table in the bottom left that compares those 2 types of charging. So level 2 charging uses a 240 volt alternating current input. The chargers that are out there can deliver power anywhere from 6 to 19.2 kilowatts. And in terms of charging speed, they add about 20 to 50 miles of range per hour spent charging. And it depends on where you are on the 6 kilowatt end or the 19.2 kilowatt end, and also the level of power that a particular vehicle can take in. Level 2 charging makes sense in places where people are parked for a couple of hours so that they can add a fair amount of range. DC fast charging is the much more high-powered charging. It's the type of charging you might use on a longer road trip. It has as an input 3-phase 480 volt alternating current. It delivers power anywhere between 50 and 350 kilowatts. The speed of charging varies. 50 kilowatts and 350 kilowatts are very different, but it also depends on the vehicle model that you're using and the current state of charge. But a good rule of thumb is that in general, DC fast charging can get you from 10% full to 80% full in 30 minutes or less. The newer vehicles are all much faster charging. Some of them can go 10 to 80 in 12 minutes or 15 minutes, but in general, good rule of thumb, 10 to 80% in 30 minutes or less. In terms of charging ports, there's a couple different standards that exist that Community Charge will support. Here I will pull your attention to the bottom right, where we've got a graphic that shows the different charging ports. The J1772, which is in the middle, is used by non-Tesla vehicles for level 2 charging. And then for DC fast charging, the industry gets a little bit more split. So CCS combo, which is the one that's furthest to the right, is used by most non-Tesla vehicles for DC fast charging. And then on the left, we've got NACS, or the North American Charging Standard. that's used by Tesla and an increasing number of other manufacturers for level 1, level 2, and DC fast charging. The vehicle market right now is converging on NACS over the next couple of years. All the major automakers are moving towards the NACS standard. Right now, we've still got a mix, but the good news is that there are adapters available in basically all directions. So if you've got a vehicle that has a CCS port, but you want to use a NACS station, the automakers have an adapter that you can use to do so. And Community Charge will support all of these plug types and will work with you to figure out which it makes sense to install or what combination of ports it makes sense to install. So I hope that was a good, quick overview of charging levels and ports. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Next, we know that site hosts are curious about operations and maintenance and what that means for EV charging stations. So site hosts who decide to own, operate, and maintain their charging stations should expect to do each of the following things. Through the app or the software that comes with your smart charger, you can track usage, set rates per kilowatt hour or per minute, depending on how you want to charge people to use the station. And you need to pay the utility bills for the stations. You'll need to regularly inspect and clean the stations, monitor usage and customer feedback to identify any performance issues, update software when needed, and make any needed repairs. This, we know, is a lot of administrative work and is one of the primary reasons why nonprofits and public entities are maybe a little hesitant to install EV charging stations, because this is a lot of work that somebody's got to do. And this is part of the issue that we're hoping to address with Community Charge by offering a charging as a service route, where a vendor that has been pre-vetted and chosen by the Community Charge team will take on all of these responsibilities. And the Power Options team will talk more about that later in the webinar, but we just wanted to cover the basics of what do operations and maintenance even look like for EV charging stations. I'll walk through a couple levels of incentives now, but I'll say that you do not need to memorize this. This is what the Community Charge team and Power Options is for. They will help you figure out what you qualify for so that you don't need to memorize all this right now. But at a high level, we've got federal, state, and utility incentives that you may or may not qualify for. So federally, we've got the Federal Alternative Fuel Vehicle Refueling Charging Credit. It's Credit 30C. It is in place until June 30th of 2026. It was going to be in place until 2032 per the Inflation Reduction Act, but the Big Beautiful Bill cut that short. So it expires on June 30th of 2026. It covers up to 30% of the cost of installing a charging station, up to $100,000 for commercial installations, but it's only available to entities that are in low-income or non-urban census tracts. The U.S. Department of Energy has a mapping tool where you can type in your specific address, figure out if your site is eligible or not for this tax credit. But importantly, it is available to tax-exempt entities via elective pay, which you may have heard described as direct pay. Basically, it just means even if you're a tax-exempt entity, you can capture the value of this tax credit. So Argonne National Lab under the U.S. Department of Energy has this tool that we have a screenshot of on the right, but we can also help you figure out if your site or sites may or may not qualify for this tax credit. Moving from the federal to the state level, the Department of Environmental Protection in Massachusetts has several incentive programs under the banner of Mass EVIP, which stands for Massachusetts Electric Vehicle Incentive Program. Mass EVIP has different programs available for level 2 charging stations at different types of sites. So multi-unit dwellings, educational campuses, workplaces, fleets, and public access sites. There are no incentives available through Mass EVIP for DC fast charging. So again, all of those incentives are for level 2 charging. But the incentives generally cover 60% of the costs up to $50,000 per street address. In some cases, if it's a government-owned public access site, for example, those sites may be eligible for up to 100% of the costs to be covered. So Mass EVIP has been around for many years, has supported many EV charging stations, and the team at DEP is doing a great job of getting the word out. So this is an incentive that your site may be eligible for. And then finally, we've got utility incentives. National Grid and Eversource are the investor-owned utilities that serve the majority of the state. They have programs for the same sectors, basically, that Mass EVIP has. So those are multifamily homes, workplaces, fleets, and public sites. And what they generally cover is up to 100% of the costs of any needed infrastructure upgrades. So if we go back to that graphic that we saw earlier, the part that is covered in this red box, those infrastructure upgrades are generally covered under these programs under the term Make Ready. So if you've heard of the term Make Ready, it just means infrastructure upgrades needed to support an EV charging station. And then depending on your site type and location, there may also be utility rebates for the charging hardware that you would then basically plug into those upgrades that the utility makes. We're in a weird spot right now in that the funds have been depleted in some segments for National Grid and Eversource, and they have essentially petitioned the Department of Public Utilities to make some adjustments in their programming and their budgets. And we're waiting for that Department of Public Utilities to make a decision there. So the programs may reopen in those segments where they're depleted soon, and the utilities have waiting lists too. But again, that's something Power Options team can help walk you through. And then if you are in a community that is served by Unitil or a municipal light plant, Unitil has incentives too. Many of the municipal light plants do as well. And those may cover the infrastructure upgrades or the hardware or both. So that is something the community charge team can walk you through and can also help you understand where you can and cannot stack these utility, state, and federal funds. With that, we're going to go to a second poll to get some more info. We want to get a sense of, did that help you understand electric vehicle charging and what your biggest concern is with EV charging? Because the whole point of this community charge program, which we'll talk about in just a moment, is to address those concerns. So it looks like most of you are pretty confident in your understanding of electric vehicle charging, which is exciting. And some of you are excited to learn more, which is great. That's what we're here for. Biggest concerns of EV charging or with installing EV charging are costs and the administrative work of maintenance and operations, which is not surprising. We've heard that from lots of public and nonprofit entities before. So that is what Community Charge is here to help with. And I will turn it over to Anna to introduce Community Charge.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to introduce you to Community Charge and talk a little bit more about our program. And first, I want to start with an overview. Our tagline is powering our neighborhoods together. And this is something we want to achieve. And our goal is to bring EV charging access to low, moderate income drivers in environmental justice communities. But what does that mean? People who are low or moderate income drivers oftentimes do not have access to charging. That is either because they do not have off-street parking or they live in multi-family buildings. And this is something that we want to address with our program. We want to specifically target people who currently rely on a personal vehicle but cannot practically make the switch to an electric vehicle because of the lack of charging stations. And in particular, we want to target and prioritize residents of environmental justice communities. These communities are areas that face disproportionate environmental and social burdens. And on this slide, I included a link that shows the different environmental justice communities in Massachusetts. I do, however, want to mention that the chargers itself do not necessarily have to be in an EJC, but they do have to serve the needs of environmental justice communities. Because we believe that low and moderate income residents of these communities will benefit from the lower fuel and maintenance costs of electric vehicles. And for our program, as we already mentioned, we are using the competitively procured equipment and installation pricing, leveraging the 500 plus members of the Power Options Consortium. And for those who are not familiar with Power Options, we are a nonprofit based out of Boston, and we work all over the Northeast exclusively with other nonprofits and public entities. And we do everything energy related for them and help them reach their decarbonization goals. For example, we do fleet electrification, EV charging, building decarbonization, solar, energy procurement, and a lot of other things. And for this grant, for this program, we are really excited to have received a grant from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, which is called the Act Fall 2 grant. And for this program, we are able to provide funding for host administrative time, community outreach and engagement support, and project implementation support. And on the next slide, I will dive a little bit deeper into community outreach and education. If you are part of this program and we are helping you install the charging stations, we will also provide you with education materials such as social media posts, one-pagers, and translated marketing materials. We also want to host community events to increase awareness and educate drivers of electric vehicles and help them make the switch to an electric vehicle. And on the next slide, I do want to talk a little bit about the two different procurement pathways. We have two different options how to procure equipment under this program. The first I want to talk about, that's what we call charging as a service. Under this procurement pathway, you are the host, but you would work with one of our providers to install and maintain the EV charging stations. So the stations would be located on your property, but a third party, one of our providers that we selected during the RFP process, would come in and install, own, operate, and maintain the charging stations. The provider would also pay for the hardware, the software, the installation, and electricity. And you would get compensated via a profit share agreement with the third party. And the profits in this case are driven by station usage. So this is a more hands-off approach. And then for our second model, we have host-owned. So under this model, you as the host, you would procure either the hardware, software, and installation a la carte, or you can use a turnkey vendor that comes in and they install their equipment and but then you as the site host, you would finance, own, and operate and manage the charging station. So this is a more hands-on approach. And we would also set the rates, so set the pricing, manage the software, and keep all the profits in the end. However, you are also responsible for ensuring the stations and addressing any issues. And here I also want to mention that you don't have to decide on either or. Once we meet with you, we would go through the details of your project and then figure out together with you what would be the best procurement pathway for your host site. And we will help you with the procurement process for charging as a service, host-owned, turnkey, and a la carte. And we will also help you maximize the incentives so that we can reduce the out-of-pocket costs. Thank you very much. And with that, I will turn it over to Fair to talk a little bit more about use cases and eligibility.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anna, for that. That was really well said. And with that, I will walk through some of the use cases and eligibility requirements for this community charge program. So as Anna said, that this program really does prioritize giving access of EV charging stations to environmental justice communities. So each use case prioritizes that. First, we have a publicly accessible option where chargers must be open to the general public year-round, 24/7. However, if you would like to go through this avenue and your site has restrictions to how many hours a day you can have a charger operating for the general public, we can reduce that hour to a minimum of 12 hours a day. So this would be a kind of scenario where if you have a site where you can only have it after business hours, we could reduce that to 12 hours a day. Next, we have a workplace option where the sites need to have at least 15 employees and must offer community charging access outside of normal business hours. However, it's not required to be open to the public all year round 24/7. Next, we have multi-unit dwelling, which must have at least 5 residential units, and these do not need to be open to the public year round 24/7. And finally, we have educational campuses, and these campuses must have at least 15 or more students and allow community access outside of school hours where it's feasible. And again, since this isn't a publicly accessible use case, there is not required to be open to the public year-round 24/7. Moving on to eligibility criteria. To participate, the site must be owned by a nonprofit, profit, or public entity. The entity must own or control the property where the chargers will be installed. So if you're in a situation where you have a landlord or a manager, you would just need permission from that person to put the charging station on that site. You must serve a low or moderate income drivers in at least one environmental justice community. But as Anna mentioned before, you do not need to be directly located inside of an environmental justice community. You just need to make the case that you would be serving one of these communities. And then finally, we have a timeline to have these stations operational from September 2026 to July 2027. So you would have to have a site that's constructed and ready to install stations from this timeline. So unfortunately, if you had new construction you were hoping to have install EV charging stations in, and it wouldn't be ready from this timeline, that site wouldn't work. But if you have other stations that could go in at a different site where it's ready to go, then that could work. So spots are limited under the community charge grant, the Mass DEC grant, because there's first come, first served funding. And also we're just trying to make as many stations be installed in as many locations as we can, but this funding is limited. And interested entities who are either not eligible with the criteria I just said or are not selected for this community charge program can still be served by the Power Options EV charging program. And you might be concerned that the cost will be more expensive because we don't have this grant to work with under our program, but we will work with you to continue to identify possible incentives or funding avenues to reduce the project costs as much as possible. And our EV charging program at Power Options operates very similarly to this community charging program. Power Options, using the collective strength of our large consortium base, went out for an RFP to select trusted and experienced EV charging vendors to secure competitive pre-negotiated pricing, quality equipment, reputable and experienced project developers for our program for your utilization. And along the way, you will acquire Power Options to help advise and walk you through the process to make sure it's as easy as possible. So now some frequently asked questions to hopefully answer some of your questions before they come up. Again, who is eligible to participate in community charge? Nonprofit and public entities that serve low to moderate income communities in environmental justice communities. What are the costs to participate? So there is no cost to receive a proposal or a consultation from us at Power Options and to get connected with a participating vendor. So you can just come to us with a list of sites. We can analyze what's feasible, and that would be at no cost to you. If we decide to move on to the point where you choose a charging as a service or a host-owned option to contract these stations with, the costs from that point would be dependent on the chosen procurement options and the site needs, so costs will vary. However, Community Charge has pre-vetted competitive pricing for all program options, and we'll do our best to buy down project costs as much as possible with the grant funding that we have and available incentives. Are low-income housing developers, nonprofits that utilize low-income housing tax credits eligible for this program? Yes, they are. And finally, how many charging stations can I install under the community charge program? Under community charge, we are recommending that each site have 2 dual port level 2 charging stations, but we can serve any further needs under the Power Options EV charging program if you're wanting more stations of that. The reason why we're recommending this is because we're trying to make our funding stretch for as many sites as possible and work with as many organizations as possible to give access to as many low to moderate income drivers and EJCs as possible. And with that, I'll give it back to Anna.
Hi, everybody. I'm back with our third and final poll. This one is just one question. So we want to get a sense of, based on what you just heard from Anna and Fair, which of the two ownership or procurement options through community charge are you most interested in? Okay, I will end this for now and I'll share this poll. So looks like a slight preference for charging as a service, but really majority folks are still taking this in and trying to understand which of these two options would be best for you. So the good news is the Power Options team is here to help with that. But I will now actually turn it over to Joe to talk about how to actually get started.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so I think the sentiment that you've heard throughout is that time is of the essence. So community charge runs through July 2027, but we're encouraging folks to apply as soon as they can. You may be already aware of the fact that federal tax credits will be expiring in the coming year and a half as a result of some of the recent federal executive actions on that front, and we're not quite sure about what these incentives will look like from the investor-owned utilities side or state rebate program side. So again, just encouraging folks to apply now, as it will be more interesting to do so in the coming months. And yeah, hopefully, while I've been talking, folks have been able to scan the QR code to learn more. I'll leave a few more seconds before our next slide. Knowing that we're going to circulate these slides after the meeting, as mentioned. So yeah, so in the next steps, we are just trying to give you a sense of what to expect once you've made first contact with us. So you can use the email address that's listed here to get in touch with our team. And once we get in touch, we'll be coordinating an introductory meeting to discuss some more details about the program, how they might apply to your sites and some of your sites for hosting EV charging stations. And after that point, and some vetting that we do on our end, the team would share a letter of intent for you to sign. We're anticipating that the process of actually picking one or more host sites would take 1 to 2 months, depending on the specific circumstances, the type of site. And then after that point, we'll work towards the EV service equipment deployment and ongoing community outreach so that you can get the word out. But again, we're hoping to get the process started as soon as possible. So I think I'll hand it back for Q&A.
Thanks, Joe. I will invite all 5 of us to come back. We've got a whole bunch of good questions, so I will just run through them in the order received. So Susan asks about the charging as a service option. Who ensures the stations and the use in that case?
Walt, do you want to take this?
Sure, I can take this one. So this would be the personal property of the VOOM, that the charging as a service vendor. So they would maintain insurance for their equipment. There may be some requirements about liability insurance maintained by the host, but the actual property would be insured by the property owner, which would be the charging as a service provider.
Russell asks, is the community charge program a pilot? If it's successful, could it reopen after July 2027?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. So yeah, this is a new program, and we're trying to serve as many hosts as we can, but we are hoping and planning to continue the program beyond 2027. So if you have a specific program in mind, and obviously we can also still serve you past community charge with our Power Options program. So I would recommend that you send us an email at communitycharge@poweroptions.org, and we can discuss in detail about the site that you might have in mind or a project you have in mind.
There are a couple of questions from different people that I'm bundling into one, which are basically, who are the vendors? How do I find out who the vendors are?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a great question. We have a bunch of different wonderful, amazing vendors that are cutting edge and have the best pricing. So we did an RFP that we just concluded with different options. And once we get to the phase with a specific host, depending on the type of program you want, is if it's charging as a service or if it's host owned, then we can talk in more detail about the different vendors. Anna, you're on mute.
Of course I am. Does the program cover curbside charging stations?
Walt, do you want to take that?
Sure. It might be a difficult fit for specifically the community charge program, but we're happy to take a look and see what we can do. It's not explicitly against the rules, so we can absolutely assess what we can do for you with that.
Michelle has a general question about complying with procurement law. So the question is, since the vendors have been pre-vetted, do municipalities have to go through a second procurement process to meet state requirements?
Yes, I can take that. So no, you don't have to go through a second procurement process. We are working under our enabling statute, and that's what we've been doing on behalf of our members, nonprofits, and public entities for other programs as well, where we go out to RFPs. So you don't have to do that. I'm not sure, Walt, if there's anything to add.
No, I think you captured it, Anna. This is clearly under the enabling statute. The Power Options offers all of our programs under. So you can participate in the program, leveraging the collective buying power of our large consortium without having to incur the administrative burden or expense of going it alone.
Let's see. I think there's a little bit of confusion about eligibility based on location, because we did throw a bunch of different things at you that have different eligibility requirements. So Power Options team, can you reiterate what it is that makes a site host eligible in terms of EJ status for community charge? And then I can cover the federal tax credit again, because those are overlapping but not identical maps.
Yes. So our goal is to serve low and moderate income drivers. So our goal is to serve underserved communities that don't have access to charging because they live in multi-family buildings, or they just simply cannot just put in a charger where they live. So we talked a lot about environmental justice communities, and we are trying to target different environmental justice communities. However, if you are an organization that, for example, is a housing authority and you're housing low, moderate income families, then this would also qualify even if you're not in an environmental justice community. And I know there are a lot of different layers to that, but please send us an email. This is on a case-by-case basis, and we can discuss. And you can also just send us an email with the address of your location, and we can take a look at that.
I think a through line for some of these questions is email communitycharge@poweroptions.org so that we can be more specific. The question I got here was the rural non-urban areas. Do they qualify even if they're not an environmental justice community? Environmental justice community is a Massachusetts state definition, and that is what the utilities and the state programs use to determine eligibility for different incentives. The rural, non-urban, low-income thing is a federal definition, so it's a different map, and that only applies to the federal tax credit. So long story short, email Power Options with your site, and we can tell you what you qualify for or not, because it does get complicated between all these things.
And I'll just add on
Yeah.
to that that's one of the reasons why we created this program and why we're accessible to you. So being here as a nonprofit, our job is to um, outsource this area for you. So in addition to your day job of running your nonprofit or administrate or doing the administrative work associated with your entity, you don't also have to become an expert in tax law definitions and all these different programs intersect. That's our job. So feel very welcome and encouraged to use us because that's what we're here for.
One question from Josh is, can you clarify what the program provides to participants following the host-owned track?
Yes. So we are basically, if you decide you want to own the charging stations, then you would also go through our program and work with one of our program providers, depending on if you want to do a la carte or turnkey installation. And for that, similar to or same as charging as a service, we will offer some project subsidization, some funding to cover admin time, and also help you with community outreach, and also help you maximize the incentives. And once we connect you with a provider, we will still be there. So we will still be working with you and the provider alongside to make sure everything goes smooth, and yeah, be there to answer any questions you have.
Second part of the same question is, how accessible are supplemental funds for DC fast chargers really at this point?
Yeah, well, do you want to take that?
In terms of how accessible, not very, unfortunately. So most of the incentives that we have available to us are really don't put enough of a dent in the significantly increased cost that level 3 stations come with, both in terms of installation costs and for the actual stations. So, it would be a case-by-case basis. We'd want to take a look at it. In some cases, the vendor owned and operated charging as a service model can work for this. So if you're in a really good site where they anticipate high usage, that can be a good solution for that.
I will also add that the utility programs have run through the available funding for DC fast charging in certain segments. And the utilities basically went back to the Department of Public Utilities and said, okay, we've used up the money in this bucket faster than we thought and this bucket slower than we thought. Can we move some of the funding around in the back end to reopen some of these segments that are currently fully subscribed? And that's what the DPU hasn't issued an order on yet. So it's possible that in a couple months, there might be utility funding for some of these segments where right now there isn't any. And that's something that the program would adjust to in real time, depending on when the DPU deigns to issue an order on that question.
Yeah, and if you're really interested in DC fast chargers for a specific use case, I think it's worth conversation with us because there are traditional DC fast chargers. There are also what we refer to often as level 2 pluses, which are just high powered level 2s. That might be an efficient solution for you. If not, and you really want the level 3s, after a chat with us, we can certainly keep you posted if and when things change, as Anna described. Then we could reach back out and help get that project moving as fast as possible, because utilities did burn through their level 3 funding pretty quickly last go round. There's, I think, some significant pent up demand, so I would reasonably expect they might burn through it pretty quickly once the floodgates are opened again. So we could make sure that you're among the first in line for that.
There are a couple of questions regarding the deadline for the federal tax credit. So a couple of folks have asked, is that an application deadline or a completion deadline? That I will double check. Actually, Walt, if you know the answer off the top of your head, I'm pretty sure it is station is in the ground, and then you don't actually file the paperwork until you do your taxes the next year, or as a tax exempt entity, apply for elective pay after the fact. So question one to Power Options, is that correct? And then question two, some folks are asking, will this actually move fast enough for us to be able to take advantage of that tax credit?
Probably. So, Scott, on the tax deadline, our understanding is that this is a placed in service deadline. So, there could be some utility lag on that. So, again, no surprise to anyone. Time is of the essence. We encourage you to move sooner than later. I just on process, we're not tax advisors. None of this should be construed as tax advice, and would recommend you consult with a appropriate tax consultant on all this. But as long as you're placed in service by that 6/30/26 deadline, you should be good, and there should be enough time to do that. We're still we have 8 months to get started, get approval for the utility programs, get the project done. Yeah, we should be good on timeline, but it is going to start getting tight.
I'm going to bundle a couple other questions as well. One attendee, Cassie, said they really want to keep costs to residents minimal. Can you make a recommendation as to which system would be better, which I'm interpreting as host-owned versus charging as a service? And then Josh also asked, can you be more specific about expected savings for either of these options compared to going out and doing it on your own?
Yeah, so I can take the first question on to keep the cost minimal to the residents. So under charging as a service, the provider would set the rates. So you don't have as much leveraging power in that regard, where they will do the upfront investment. So you have very minimal upfront costs or maybe none at all. And then they're trying to recoup their investment over time. And how they do it is through setting the rates at a certain point. However, the goal of this is to make charging accessible to anyone. So the charging rates are not going to be set at a crazy high price, and we'll be keeping an eye on that because that's the goal of this program, is to make it accessible for anyone. And then under host-owned, if you want to have more control over the rates under the host-owned scenario, you're going to set the rates. So you can set the rates, how much you want to charge from your residents for charging at your station. However, there are also some other things to consider where you would be in charge of maintenance and so on.
One question is, would community charge support a bidirectional charger? For folks who aren't familiar with that term, these are chargers that can not only take energy from the grid and put it into your vehicle, but also take energy from your vehicle's battery and put it back onto the grid to help manage supply and demand on the grid and participate in various demand response programs. Is that something that community charge would support?
Yeah, so just reading the question, I do want to flag that these chargers under community charge cannot be used for fleet charging. However, we can serve you under our general Power Options program, and we do also have some bidirectional chargers that we are working with. So I would recommend just send us an email at communitycharge@poweroptions.org, maybe explain your situation, and then we can set up a meeting and talk in more detail about this.
Thank you for the clarification on fleets. I know we talked about the fleet incentives just to give people an overview of the incentives that exist, but that's a good clarification. Do nursing homes and assisted living facilities qualify as multi-unit residential properties?
I would say yes. Walt, do you have more experience?
I don't know for sure. I think we could certainly make an argument, and would be making the argument, to the incentive program administrators. I think if we can, wedge it into the definition of residential unit, that would be the question. So they'd have to definitively opine on that, but I think so.
Okay, I know we've got about 5 minutes left, but I believe in us. I think we can do this.
Power lightning round.
Okay. Somebody was contacted by a vendor that says that they work with Power Options. Should they just work with that vendor or go through Power Options?
Yeah, I'd recommend. Go for it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, would always prefer to have an eye on what's going on. Most of our vendors are very responsible, but we always just like to be in the mix to make sure that everything follows our program rules and everyone's behaving as they should.
Yes, and we also want to make sure that you can get some of that funding through the Act for All 2 grants. So I would recommend reaching out to us.
Can you share anything about what your modeling includes for estimated utilization rates?
Yes. So what I can share is that it depends. So what we do is with the charging as a service provider, we will assess the site based on a multi-point criteria of how we score and select sites, and that will impact what we bake in for the initial utilization rates. So that's our methodology, and sorry for the non-answer, but it really does depend on the site.
How complicated is the application for community charge?
Very easy. Just send us an email with your contact information. We'll set up a meeting, and then we talk to you and about a potential site.
Can you share more about what the profit sharing agreement looks like?
Yes. So again, that's very site specific. So we look at the way that our program works. So the charging as a service provider is that we financially model the project, and their internal rate of return over the project is capped. So, if it's a site where it's a really expensive install and low projected utilization, the profit share is not going to be that great to the host. If it's a site with a really cheap and easy install and projected high utilization, the profit share percentage going to the site host would be a lot higher.
Okay, we've got 4 minutes. I might have been overly optimistic with getting through all the questions in that
We can
time.
do it. Let's go.
Can users reserve a time slot to do their charging in advance?
That would be at the discretion of the host. If it's under charging as a service, probably not. If it's host owned, only if the host specifically allows for it.
Are maintenance warranties covered under the program funding for the host pathway? I think this means that there's some administrative support funds available through the grant through Mass CEC. If you are one of the site hosts that get those funds, can you use those to cover maintenance warranties?
Yes.
Tina, if I didn't ask your question correctly, please send us an email and we'll get back to you. Are the chosen vendors approved for municipal use on the state contract?
Some of them. So they keep releasing new awardees of the VEH 122 contract, which is a state contract. So it keeps getting updated and updated. Most of them are so far.
But to clarify, a municipality could legally use one of the vendors who's not on the state contract because of the power options procurement pathway that exists in state law.
Yes.
Okay.
Did we do it?
We have more questions in the chat.
Yes, 2 more. We can do it. We can do it. Can you use this program to replace an old existing charging station?
I think technically, but would want to look at what it was, because we might have better options than just ripping it out and replacing.
And then last one, I think, is Jim writes, a vendor approached us to install a $45,000 EV charging station at zero cost to us by claiming that the state covered the cost. Is that possible?
I'd treat it with a grain of salt. I'd want to look at it. It certainly can be in some cases, but I have seen some overly optimistic proposals by certain vendors out there.
Okay. With that, I think we officially made it through all the questions by 12:59. So I'd like to thank and congratulate all of our speakers today, and also thank you all for the really good questions. I will say, if we didn't get to your question, please do email communitycharge@poweroptions.org. Even if we did get to your question, please email communitycharge@poweroptions.org. Once we've processed the recording and uploaded it onto YouTube, we'll send you the slides of the recording, as well as the landing page that's got more information about the program. And you are welcome to reach out to any of us in the meantime. And I hope you all have a lovely rest of your Tuesday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.